Come, come, whoever you are, wanderer, worshiper, lover of leaving, it does not matter. Ours is not a caravan of despair. Come, even if you have broken your vows 1,000 times. Come yet again. Come. These words are words that many of us are familiar with, or at least most of them, that come from the Muslim Sufi poet Jalal al-Din Rumi. And we'll get to sing some of them in a little bit. But before we get there, I want to tell you a story that I came across BuzzFeed when I was passing time taking some quizzes, ended up coming across an actual news story that piqued my interest. It's a story about a man named Romani Erian Malik Heta. In January 2018, Heta went to visit the Museum of the Bible in DC with his faith group. The rest of his group went inside while he waited outside for a friend of his who had not yet arrived. While he was waiting, a couple of security guards came up to him and asked what he was doing, and he explained. They went back inside. His friend never showed, and so Heta ended up going through the museum on his own and catching up with his faith group in the museum's cafe. But while he was in the cafe, a couple more security guards approached him and escorted him to a small room, and they blocked the exit. In that room, they questioned him for about 20 or 25 minutes about why his friend never showed. Heta explained that his friend was new to the United States and that he didn't have a cell phone. The guards continued to question him about why he was there, and then they demanded to see his ID. The museum staff compiled what BuzzFeed reports a dossier about Heta, and then sent the FBI a copy of his ID, saying he might be a terrorist or security threat. And his ordeal did not stop there. The FBI began calling Heta's home, talking to his roommate, even visiting his residence and interviewing his landlord. A few months later, Heta eventually agreed to an interview with the FBI to clear his name and preserve his ability to stay in the United States. The reason he had to do that was because Heta was here seeking safety from persecution. Heta's story is woven, his liberation is woven with mine because Heta was a Coptic, or is a Coptic Christian from Egypt. And for him, in recent political times, it is not safe. As an Egyptian and as a Muslim, I wrestle with how my story intertwines with him and his story, both in Egypt and here in the United States. Heta, in reflecting on what happened at the museum, said that the museum was going along with the narrative that being Middle Eastern is a sign of security threats, that the people at the museum will never be able to comprehend that there is a Christian person who doesn't look like them. And I would invite that museum to take a look at the historical Jesus, who was, in fact, Middle Eastern. But there are assumptions made in that story about who Heta was, who he is. There are nuances that are overlooked about his experience as a Coptic Christian in Egypt and a Coptic Christian Middle Eastern person in the United States. There are moments of biases and prejudices turning into active racism in the profiling of this person. Who here had some thoughts about what his faith tradition might be in hearing this story? Yeah, he may have been Christian, he may have been Muslim, we may have been filling in those blanks. And just think, if Hetta had been Muslim, how do you think that story may have turned out in their minds and in yours? So that's a story about something that happened in the Museum of the Bible, which is led by Hobby Lobby's president, so may not be people we often resonate with. But there are stories that happen within our own Unitarian Universalist communities. One event that I attended a couple of years ago with a colleague of mine, we were standing and talking with each other at a reception, and a young adult comes up to us and says, "Are you two sisters?" And we looked at each other confused because my friend is a petite white woman, and I'm me. I'm not a petite white woman. So we look at each other and we're like, "No, why do you think we're sisters?" And this person responds with, "Well, you have short hair and glasses." It's a ridiculous assumption that because we have these two characteristics that are the same, that we are sisters. There was a story created about us because of these features. No malicious intent, but an awkward situation at the least. We were able to shrug it off. But that's one of the more innocent moments. There are others that also happen in our communities. One of my first General Assemblies, I went to a panel presentation on which the Reverend Bill Sinkford, our first person of color to serve as the president of the Unitarian Universalist Association, he was on that panel, and he was also the first African American to serve as president. So I went to this panel to hear about his reflections on social justice with some others, and then they opened up the room to questions. And a white gentleman came up to the mic and accused Bill Sinkford of not doing his job. There were not enough people of color in Unitarian Universalism. That hurt to watch that happen. And then, to add insult to injury, this same person looked around the room and said, "All I see are white faces. All I see are white people." And I'm sitting there with my friend of Asian descent looking at each other like, what are we? What is this? So that hurt. And that's not the only story that comes out of Unitarian Universalism and the assumptions we make, the biases that we may hold. I facilitate drum retreats as the president, thankfully outgoing. I'm ready to focus on my new job in June, but we have gatherings for people of color every fall. And at every single one of those retreats, without fail, somebody comes up to us at the end and says, "Thank you for this. I almost left Unitarian Universalism. I was out the door. This brought me back." These stories aren't uncommon. And we actively can make choices to change them, to try to make things a little different. I know that my choice to come here and serve as your intern was partially because of the amazing work that this congregation does and your support of your interns for decades. But it also, to be entirely honest with you, was driven by the fact that your lead minister is a person of color. And that is not an option that we have in most of our congregations for interns. That's a stark reality. And so I say this not as an admonition, not as an accusation, but as an invitation to acknowledge that there are places where we have sometimes fallen short. There are places when we might make mistakes, places where we might act on biases we may not realize we have. This is an invitation to remember that we might not be the Museum of the Bible or Hobby Lobby, but we're not immune to the troubles of our world. There are assumptions and biases that we live within and that live within us. Though you've broken your vows 1,000 times, come yet again, come. I share these stories as an invitation to remember that our worth our belonging in community is not tied to whether or not we make mistakes. We're gonna make mistakes. Thank you. We are worthy of love. Done. Period. Don't question it. We are worthy of love. And when we acknowledge our capacity to return to community, recognizing that we have made mistakes, recognizing that we still need to learn, we create an even more powerful love among us. We create that universalist promise that everybody is worthy of love. And that's why I love the entirety of Rumi's poem. Because as a Muslim, God is known as the compassionate, the most merciful, who invites us to return over and over and over again when we make mistakes, when we cause harm, because we know we are worthy of love and can create that love. So I invite you to try something a little different with me right now. Sing with me. Though you've broken your vows 1,000 times, 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 though you've broken your